Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you for joining us for this interview at Automotive Management Live. Obviously, keen, given the year that dealers have just had, to get your kind of perspective on what you would say were the highs and lows of 2020 for Peter Vardy Ltd.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on, Tim. And if there's anything we can share on these types of things to help one another out in the motor trade, I think it's quite a good time to do it. I think for us, 2020 was largely positive, actually. I think one of the things when we went into lockdown, first of all, we thought, actually, we're never going to get the time again when the business isn't fully open and welcoming guests to actually work on the business to see where we want to get in the future. And I think we kind of realised quite quickly that was an opportunity to get a team together to work on where we want to go for, whether it be after sales or F&I, or whether it be sales or trying to create the best place to work or best place to buy. We kind of broke it down into 6 areas and had project teams working. So we had 150 people at work. At that point, you weren't allowed to sell a car. So those 150 were trying to make sure we were set up to try and sell something if we could. But then the rest of the time was working on the business. And we actually posted out, you could volunteer if you were on furlough, or you could do training. So we posted out to the colleagues, and there's about 900 at the time, who wanted to help with any of the workshops, strategy workshops or training. And we had 675 people take part in training or strategy workshops, which was unbelievable. And then we did a lot of communication each week. We tried to get Dave Anderson from the States to do some training of the managers. We did a competition each week, and we tried to have as much fun as we could and then give us colleagues as much update as we could. So things like getting everyone's mobile address and sending a weekly T-mail, we call them, which is a video, to everyone's mobile as well as their email. Trying to communicate a lot. That was a real positive. So I think fortunately we saw the senior team improve. We actually did a lot of recruitment through lockdown. We fast-tracked our e-commerce strategy. We looked at the culture and what we could do around engagement, and I think we built some long-term value in people's engagement with the business. We invested £500,000 in giving back to the community, so we put that money aside and then looked at where we could help out. And one of the big things we decided right at the beginning, we would try not to use as much of the furlough money as we could get away with, try not to burden the government, and also try to make no redundancies, COVID-related redundancies, which we actually achieved. So trying to balance the impact we'd have on, technically the kids paying back all of the furlough money we've spent, trying to run the business properly, trying to look after everybody's jobs, and trying to make sure we try to look after the colleagues. So I think one thing for me as a Christian is to make sure I run the business in the right way. So we came up quite quickly with the most important thing would be to look after colleagues and look after their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and the financial well-being. So really everything we did was around those 3 topics. Making it the safest place to buy. We really tried very hard to see what other industries were doing. Financially, we put some hardship loans on. If people weren't earning enough, we had some hardship loans they could get from our foundation. And then on the mental health side, we've just recently, off the back of this, set up a counselling within the group. So every colleague in the business gets an MOT once a year from a counsellor to see if they're okay, make sure they're on good form. Because like most motor groups, our audience, our employee numbers is very similar. Young males, they seem to be having a lot of time with mental health issues. So we put quite a lot of investment in how do we look after the colleagues' mental health as well. So probably a bit of a life lesson for me in terms of running a company, and a reality check on what I thought was important. And then I had to do what I'd written on the wall as my values. And it was great having my dad at the background. So Dad and I spoke at 3 o'clock every day. We prayed for everybody in the company at 3 o'clock every day, actually, is what we did. And then we talked through the business decisions we were trying to make, and we tried to do it together. And having somebody like him who's been there and done it, I'm really fortunate in that way. So, I think I learned a lot about myself, and I think the company learned a lot about what it values. And then obviously the changing face of the motor trade with e-commerce. You can imagine the amount of lessons we learned on that. And our sister business, which is SilverBullet, learned a lot on that in terms of the software space, in terms of people buying online. And the businesses that were involved in other than those 2 seem to learn a lot as well. And I think it's brought the team together more than it's ever done before.
You talked a lot there, Peter, about valuing your people and teamwork and mental health and like. Talk to us a bit more about how you've motivated your people through this difficult period, and the kind of particular kind of aspects that you've been able to bring to your staff.
Yeah, well, I speak openly and honestly, and things that I value personally. Obviously, my dad's company did very well, and a lot of us did very well out of that, and obviously my family did. And so financially, we're in a secure position. I'm very fortunate to be able to talk from a point where I can lose some money in a month and I don't close. And I know that. But so I suppose that gave me an opportunity to, if I was going to say colleagues are the most important thing to me and my family, then I had to live it out. So I remember when the whole mental, physical, and financial well-being thing. We did a lot of work in each of those areas. And so my wife actually, we do a video each week to the colleagues and gives them a business update. Of course, when I was at home, I had my iPhone and my wife and my 3 wee kids. So Anna was doing the video as we were trying to explain what it was like as a family as well at home, and what the tough things that we were going through. So we did a video each week to try and communicate. People got a lot of people communicating back of how they were feeling and how they were doing at home, and just trying to make it very authentic and actually personal, because at the end of the day, we're all exactly the same, going through the same issues. We've just got a different job. And so I really felt it was, I felt as if I'd been trained in all my leadership courses. I'm very fortunate to do with a lot of great people for a time such as this. And I had to really live up to the training I'd had and make sure I looked after the staff. So that was my personal ambition. And obviously keeping the company afloat was a pretty essential. But if I could really live out what I said I wanted to do in business about valuing people, I had to do it now. And fortunately, the team around me thought the same. And so they made key business decisions and financial decisions for themselves as well, where we really thought it was time to live out the values and work on the business for the future and minimize the loss if it was going to happen. And of course, financially, as most of the motor traders experienced, the numbers weren't as bad as we thought. And we started having a good time, especially when we came back. So we need to stick to what we learned in that period and not go back to the old days.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned SilverBullet earlier, and also the kind of ramp up of your e-commerce strategy. Following on from that, what would you say the learnings have been in terms of what are the must-have innovations or technologies that a modern motor retailer needs, even up to 2020, but most certainly now?
I think it gave us a bit of a kick up the bum, didn't it? The whole thing in terms of what other retailers doing and everything getting delivered to your house and all the thing. Hang on, we're the odd ones out here, didn't it? And obviously we pushed SilverBullet a couple of years ago thinking this was going to happen, and so SilverBullet had a good time. They offered the product for free or a deal to retailers who might be struggling. That was good for the retail and obviously good for SilverBullet because they've got more clients and more contacts, and they're still doing deals at the minute where they're trying to help people out for the long-term good of them and SilverBullet, of course.
Can you just explain what SilverBullet is, just in case those in the audience who aren't aware?
There was myself and my dad and a guy that's got a digital business looked at how we would build an online sales tool for buying a car online, the customer being able to buy it themselves. We looked at that 2 years ago, and we hived it off as a separate company, put some money in, and then thought, actually, we'll build it for ourselves. But it was such significant investment building for ourselves. We thought, well, there's some dealers down south or who would still need the same thing. If we could partly fund the development by offering it out to other people as well, then maybe it's sustainable. We could employ the people that we wanted. So the idea was that it's the most cost-effective way is for the customer to buy the car themselves, where we don't do anything. The cost of sale improvement we thought would be is obvious. We know how much it costs to sell the car. For the folks that want it, which isn't all the population, but for those that want it, could we reduce the cost of sale on those cars? Then what we found out was not only were we reducing the cost of sale, but people choose more add-ons and more finance when they don't speak to a salesperson, which is a dagger to the heart for somebody like me who's been trained as a salesperson since I was 15.
I think the perception of the industry is the opposite of that as well.
Well, yeah, but it is hard to take though, and I've been selling cars since I was 15, and to find out a customer is more profitable when buy a car without me, it's pretty difficult to live with. But that seems to be the truth. And so we found that out, which we weren't expecting about margin, which is bizarre. And so what we're trying to do is there's a bit of a problem with the customer going end to end when it involves settlement figures. So that's still a bit of a problem that still needs fixed. But you can get the customer most of the way through the journey without dealing with very many people. That's the ultimate in terms of how the business could move forward. The second one after that is an assisted sale with something like a contact center, or some people call them business development centers. Where it's an assisted sale, and the third and least most profitable is actually when we deal with the lead and pass it to a branch, and then we get the whole overhead cost with that. So we call that a lemmings diagram. So if the lemming gets across from one side to the other without dealing with anybody, that's the most profitable lemming. And then they fall down the chart towards a dealership and it becomes more expensive. So the SilverBullet guys are trying to get the customer to go from one side to the other without speaking to anybody in sales, service, and parts. So a percentage of your sales as a dealership would have incredible cost of sale and incredible margin. And of course, depending what percentage that would be, it makes a significant difference. So for us, how we did that was our e-commerce team now is basically set up essentially to sell the same number of used cars out of an office as we used to sell in all of the dealerships added together. So we took, say it's 100 cars a day, whatever the number would be. We said instead of splitting it between walk-ins and self-generated prospects and digital inquiries, we'd like to take the whole 100, if we're going to be a proper e-commerce player, and get the e-commerce team to do all of them. So now we've got 60 odd people in our e-commerce team. We're not that big a company, so that's a big number for us. That just deal with trying to keep the assisted sale as least assisted as possible, and try and take you out the market before you go and visit a site or have the car delivered to your house. So that was a big investment, as was the SilverBullet software tool to just get the customer to buy it themselves. Those two things have been huge for us, and quite exciting to learn. So I suppose when you're losing money, it's gloves off. You just have a go at stuff, doesn't it? And so liberating when you just think, oh, sod it, I'll just go and try some things. And I think that personally feeling of I'm just going to go for it and see what I can learn, I found quite exciting. And then the losses weren't there. We started making some money, so it felt even better. But that whole period of 2020, I've learned the most probably than I've ever learned in that year about e-commerce. And you can still see that happening now, where we're trying to sell, even in the current lockdown, the same number of used cars we used to do, but without anybody walking on the site. We're not doing it exactly, if I'm honest with you, at the minute. A bit disappointed how January started compared to what I hoped. But that's what we're trying to fix across the rest of the month.
And lessons such as that, how can you then apply them to the traditional dealerships that you have?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's quite interesting. I think the shape of your team. So if you say there's an e-commerce team, there's a retention team, and then there's a team that deals with walk-ins. The good news is you don't have to teach the one person the 3 different disciplines. You can just teach them on one of them and be very good at it, which is great, because most traditional sales advisors don't like prospecting, as we know. So if you can maybe hone the skills of each of the teams to be particularly good, the conversion rate of all 3 teams goes up. So what you have is 3 different sales operations all converting higher, and a percentage of the inquiries that you got dealing themselves. So your cost of sale improves there. So you actually get a much more efficient sales team by people playing to their strengths or using technology. And I think those 2 things combined, it's reallocating the resource that you've got. I mean, we would choose not to. Our cost of sale discussion is not that we'll have less salespeople, we'll just sell more cars. So it's just a way of us selling more cars and retaining a better bottom line, keeping our good people. But that's the formula. It's increased conversion rate on your leads and the customers selling a car to themselves. Those 2 things actually should improve. So you actually might have less people in your showroom, but we know we've got to get the cover, but they'll be focused on dealing with the walk-in. You might have a couple more people in a retention team, but some of the retention tools out there are getting better and better, so they can be more productive. And then your e-commerce people can either finish the sale off or make a very good qualified appointment with your showroom team. Hopefully have taken a deposit at that time. So it's been exciting. I don't think any of us well, we're certainly not there yet with all the answers, but we're working hard to try and come up with them. Certainly
very impressive. So so you spent 2020 thinking about the strategy, progressing with e-commerce and people engagement. We know from recently that you're set to exit the Vauxhall franchise and add more used car sites, which obviously you already have your 2 car store, car supermarkets. Tell us a bit more about that and what your kind of strategy is now going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I speak to my dad, he always winds me up with various things. And one thing he winds me up is that he could buy a dealership in a year and make twice the amount of profit in the year that it cost him to buy it. And he kind of laughs at how much I spend on dealerships. But yeah, it was a different economics back then, without a doubt. And this idea of buying lots of bricks and mortar, for me as a private business rather than PLC, you have a bit of a nosebleed when you see some of the prices on the dealerships. It's fabulous to do some of the premium stuff, and I absolutely love it. But you can't have that many of them because you run out of money pretty quick. And the minute you build one of these premium sites, the valuer comes along and tells you it's not worth the same amount of money as just paid to build it. So you pay goodwill and then goodwill on the property. So just trying to understand how I use the money I've been given and I steward better, I thought it might be best to invest it in the car than in the building. So could I have the equivalent of another 5 dealerships or whatever number you came up with in terms of stock, but without the building? And when you see some of these e-commerce models around the world, I mean, some of the numbers, the losses are frightening. So you try and take some of those losses away. But there is some logic in there about investing in the car rather than the dealership, if you can make the online inquiries work. So if as long as your cost per inquiry isn't too high, and you can turn your stock because you've got ideal stock mix, we thought actually that might be a good way to play. So can we get up to 10,000 cars online at any one point in time, which would be a ridiculous number if you looked at how many dealerships we had. But in the new world, that might not be too daft. You know, interest rates are low, you can buy the cars. If you can get the money, you can have a go. So can we get from where we were, which about 2,000 cars, up to 6,000 cars at the end of 2021, and see if that means that we sell more cars per site. So, you know, our dealerships would sell a sillier number of cars on the old matrix of cars per dealership, but it's the new matrix on e-commerce. So and as a family, we've always liked selling used cars and liked selling volumes of them. And the decision with Vauxhall was quite straightforward. Their market share aspiration is different from the size dealerships I built. So I either had to put another franchise in them, which I don't like doing dual franchises. I never made it work, and neither did we in the old company. Or we try and find a different use for these sites. And of course, quite a few of them are a scale that we could do car supermarkets from. And the geography of them in Scotland is quite nice. We cover 80% of the population with the sites that we've got. So we really think if we go to used cars, we might have a lot of fun. It would use the facilities that we've got. It helps us stock up without investing in any more premises. We just have to invest in marketing more. And then try and get conversion for these leads, and using SilverBullet, we think that'll help us get there. So it's been quite a long time in the making, but the agreement with Vauxhall was I wouldn't say anything, obviously, because we've had a great relationship with Vauxhall. They've been brilliant. Their strategy is now just different from ours, and we'll do premium brands and used cars, and then our digital businesses as a separate thing. So it was kind of mutually agreeable, actually. We do a good job for Vauxhall. They're pleased with what we're doing. It'll just come to an end, and we can focus on one thing and do it really well.
So sorry, yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, will the used car businesses then bring kind of learnings that you've gained from the car store operations? Because I know car store, certainly since you began that, was quite innovative in the process that you operate there.
Yeah, Pendragon nicked the name, so I had a problem with that. So yeah, I had to change the name. We learned loads about guest experience in that, about how to make it a venue that families would like to go to. And I suppose if we want to keep hold of that, so we want to make every place we build a car store, previously it was reflective of the area that we built it in, so it was quite good fun for people in that area. If we just tag on what we've learned on e-commerce to those size businesses, each of the workshops of those businesses pretty special. If you put them on 2 or 3 shifts, you start to be able to prep an awful lot of cars. Then if you have transporters out the back that you own, and you market to a bigger geographical area, you've got the success that you had originally with the original volume, but then you start delivering it out to territory and to a bigger patch. And if you have to deliver them on the back of a low loader, we'll do it. So we're trying to learn from everybody else's best practice out there, put it together in a slightly different format, so it's our own DNA, and keep our head down and just get on with it.
Okay, well, we'll be watching that with interest, certainly. So again, 2021 and kind of further out, are you looking at, you mentioned earlier about investment in bricks, but are you looking at other expansions or acquisitions to grow the group, or is the focus on growing organically?
Well, we've got our work cut out with the cars brand and establishing that as a brand, and then getting the volumes up. So without a doubt, most of our time is going to be spent on used cars and trying to get up to 25,000 this year, which would be a step up for us. We are in a discussion with a number of premium brands about expanding with them, and we've got great relationships with the ones we work with. If we could get another opportunity with those guys, there's a few others that we're speaking to, that would be great. We still look at that with the premium brands. And then we're starting a mobility division as well this year, which is looking at rental, broker business leasing. So that kind of started today. We've got plans of discussing that for about a year now. So quite excited about this idea that over a period of the next 10 years, people will go back to the shift they were doing before the pandemic of use rather than ownership. Could that happen over the next 10 years? And then we've looked at some technology areas where you do the equivalent of the Sky Scanner for the motor trade, where you give people the options of what vehicle to choose and how they would do it. So we've got some workings going on with that, and then some of the local authorities up in Scotland about how we might do that. That's a bit further away, as we try and look at how people will get around. And I think if we're just going to be the guys that sell the car and that's nothing else, and that's all we do, I think in 10 years' time we might be in a bit of bother. So we're trying to understand what the landscape's going to look like in 10 years. So all stuff that I find really, really enjoyable. And I suppose when I've seen the team of people that come around me at the moment to help run these different businesses, it's a really great opportunity that we've got, which I don't really want to waste.
Yeah. I think as well, a business like yours, you've got a family business, but you've got sufficient scale that you can try these things. When you're looking at franchise dealers, probably much further down the list, it's difficult for them to not lose control of the existing business if they have to then go off and try all these new sort of projects. So it's a capability that you seem to have in spades.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate that way, that we've got the funds to have a go at a couple of things, and we've run the business over the last 14 years, and I've got various guys to thank for that, and girls, that we've got a good balance sheet. It's pretty strong. Got some great people, got great culture. Everything we talk about, healthy discontent in business, that we're never completely satisfied with what's going on. We're always trying to learn who's doing things better. So I think that culture helps us out. And the scale that we're at now means that we can get some senior folks to come on board and want to run things and set things up, and me to try and help champion them and guide them a little bit, or leave them alone if they want left alone, really. So that's the challenge going forward, to get for these guys and girls to enjoy themselves and set something up pretty special.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the industry more broadly, Peter. You mentioned at least setting up the brokerage and kind of considering how people will use the cars in the future. What do you see as the kind of major opportunities for the traditional industry that are coming up in the next year or two, or even further out than that?
What's the opportunities for us? Well, if I'm being optimistic, and don't quote me on this because I'm not an economist by any chance, but I like this story, so I'm going to stick with it. After the pandemic, the last time, the 1920s was one of the biggest growth times for the economy of all time. I'm hoping it's going to be the same. So if you think about the investment that hopefully the government will put in to stir the economy after this, as we get through this, plus the fact that people are relatively well off compared to where they normally are in their savings account at the minute, then when we get to whatever the new normal would be, you could have a very exciting time over the next 12 months. It will be, some of the behavior that we've seen people change to on e-commerce will stay. So if you're not in the e-commerce game with the right software or the right structure of your dealership, you'll get left behind. But I think those that have set that up should have a very good time. Brexit not happening was a blessing, I think, for all of us. Then that's another bit of good news for this year. Vaccines, good news for this year. There's an awful lot to get excited about. I know right here and right now doesn't feel great, but try and think 2 months out, it's awesome. So I think we just need to learn the lessons about cost base, about efficiencies. We're trying to learn those lessons about lean management in the workshops, because we seem to waste an awful lot of time. But I'm generally quite excited about it going forward.
You mentioned workshops just on after sales. Obviously, last year the lockdowns kind of forced a lag, I guess, in some after sales work, which I know once lockdown lifted, there was lots of work to catch up on. Do you see that being a particular opportunity again this year, albeit the lockdown we're currently in isn't quite the same as last year?
Well, we're relatively busy at the moment. I think that's pretty good. I'd like to be slightly busier, but I think that's always the case, isn't it? And then I don't really know. I don't know how people are yet treating the lockdown, whether they're going to delay a service when they believe we're going to open again, or whether they're going to get it done. It's quite difficult for me to tell. I don't really. Maybe one of the other guys might be able to answer that better than me. We were obviously quite pleased with last year. At the minute we've started with people on 80% of the hours in our after sales business, that seems to be where the level of inquiries are. But obviously across February, March, you hope that goes up because of the time of year and the repeat customers. So I don't really know on after sales. We've got lots of plans, I think, what we'd like to happen, but it's probably too early at the minute to see that many trends. Our group's not probably big enough. Some of the other guys might be able to see the trends faster than me. if we're doing 90% of what I hope for at the minute as a run rate. So we'll have to see if that picks up in February, March. I'm not sure.
Okay. And just finally, we've talked about the kind of opportunities then, hopefully this year, as the economy recovers and the government drive it. Do you see any particular threats in the next kind of 12, 18 months that dealers need to be aware of?
I think it's the obvious one about FCA and the change around FCA. And I think it seems to be, if you'd had a pretty robust policy and procedure over the last couple of years, you're probably going to be all right, because the changes don't seem to be, if you're doing the job correctly, you should be okay. So that's one to navigate. How the manufacturers deal with the cost that they've taken on board through the pandemic, I don't know what it's going to be through vehicle pricing or through programs they put through. So maybe a wee bit of a worry that and new car supply, and then that knock-on effect to used car supply if the market booms. What's going to happen with used car pricing? I think everyone thinks it's going to fall through the floor this year. I'm not entirely sure how that would work, but they might know more than me. So I think the threats might be in your head, because there's more opportunities than there is threats. So I think it's getting your mindset around how to make the best of the situation, whatever it is. Because I think as an industry, we've done a pretty good job of that the last 12 months. When if you'd asked everybody how they've dealt with it, there would have been a lot of scratching heads. As soon as you were chucked in the scenario, it's incredible how resourceful and intelligent folks are in the motor trade. It's been pretty impressive to see. Absolutely.
So keep a positive mindset and look for the opportunities that are out there. Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. That's it from me, and I guess we would now go to the Q&As from the audience.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim Rose, the editor of AM, and we're now going to the live Q&A following Peter Vardy's video interview. With us this morning, unfortunately, Peter couldn't actually make it this morning. He's been called away to a manufacturer interview, but we've managed to get Cameron Wade, who was a former managing director of Peter Vardy Group and is now the managing director of SilverBullet, which is a e-commerce and software business which Peter is an investor in, and also which provides the technology, I guess, and the platform behind Peter Vardy's e-commerce operations. Also joining us this morning is Tim Piercy. He's the sales director of CDK Global, our sponsor for this session. Good morning, Cameron and Tim.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I've had a few questions come in from the audience already, but we do have time for more. So by all means, please get tapping away, and we'll cover as many as we can during the next 10 minutes or so. So a question in a way for both of you, but for Cameron to start with, talking about the e-commerce processes that were put in as a result of the pandemic last year, and what difference did they make? Perhaps you can give the perspective of the services, I guess, you provided with Peter Vardy.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Yeah, I mean, I think it's for a long time people have been trying to develop this omni-channel retailing solution. And at SilverBullet, we provide software not only to Peter Vardy, but the wider automotive industry. And I think this kind of turbocharged the need for a more direct customer offering in terms of that digital e-commerce capability. And it's been really interesting to see. I think without COVID-19, it wouldn't have come at us as fast. But I think we're now seeing customers starting to want to adapt. And particularly with the introduction of the likes of Kazam and Cazoo and Cinch, people are starting to look at that way of retailing. And I think a lot of it, Tim, is about customer ease. We're trying to bring digital products to the customer that makes their ability to buy a car a lot easier online. And we're seeing some incredible results. We're seeing how customers can buy a car a lot quicker. They can buy a car in an environment that suits them better. And in many cases, we're seeing customers buying cars at higher margins and higher finance penetrations as well. So it seems to be something that people, we're not seeing every car being bought online. And I think anyone that tells you that would be kidding you on. But I think what we are seeing is that sort of first step in the journey to people embracing the fact that you can buy something as big as a car and do it in a full e-commerce capability.
And Tim, what's your perspective? The question also asks, will dealers wish they'd introduced e-commerce sooner? What's your perspective from CDK?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tim. So I guess in our world, it caused us, like many businesses, to pause and reflect on what we were doing and how we were deploying our resources and so on. We spent a lot of time talking to our customers when the pandemic first hit to understand what the pressures were that they were feeling. We also brought to the table some ideas that we had to potentially accelerate parts of that digital journey. And as a consequence, we redirected a lot of our resources into bringing to the market some tool sets that would help dealers facilitate that customer journey online. So some of the traditional touch points that have been so difficult, that have been so important to the dealers, pretty much disappeared overnight with COVID and what have you. So we invest a lot of time and energy, for example, in bringing to the market online payment systems, so paid by link, electronic deal file solutions, tools to help distance selling. And we did a lot of work, or accelerated the work we're already doing in our partner program, to integrate to more third-party providers who were out in the marketplace offering solutions, a bit like Checkbook, for example, offering solutions that enabled our clients to transact more safely and at a distance from their clients. So it's had a fairly significant impact on where we've diverted and put our resources to work over the last 12 months.
Okay. So, and further to that, have either of you, do you think the industry has had to employ new people with different skill sets as a result of the pandemic, but also, I guess, the growing trend of consumers wanting to do more and more online? What's your view on that? Perhaps Cameron first on that one.
Yeah, I think the industry has definitely had to change. The traditional model of appointments being made in a sort of physical dealership environment is changing, and so we're now having to look at teams and skills in that e-commerce space. So people have more digital assets to share. They're far more versed in the capabilities of technology. So I think there's a different skill set coming through. I think it's more aligned with what the consumer wants anyway. And I think that's going to continue to accelerate. I think even once COVID-19 is a thing that we talked about in the past, I think there'll still be, a huge desire from the customer that this way of buying a car will continue and grow.
Okay. And Tim, your response to that?
We haven't necessarily had to go and employ people with different skill sets. I think what we've had to do is to learn different things, and what was less important previously has become much more important. We've had to understand and invest in new technologies, and that's been an interesting journey for us. We don't always get it right. Sometimes we will get it wrong because none of us are quite sure what the end game looks like. But I think the important thing for us has been to keep talking to our clients. They're the people who are closest to the end consumer, and to be continuously directed by their experiences, and that should then form the basis of what we do and do going forward.
Absolutely. Questions come in asking about kind of expectations for the 2021 market. Really, is there a chance that car sales will grow significantly, or is that a pipe dream this year? Cameron, what's your view on that?
I think there's challenges and opportunities. There appears to be some short-term challenges around the actual production of new cars. That looks as if that's going to be a short-term challenge there. But I think, as we saw during the kind of first and second lockdown, there's certainly pent-up demand for consumers to want to buy cars and to take on after-sales services as well. And I think more than ever, if you look at some of the economic stats, people have more money at their disposal because they've not been going on holiday. They've not been doing some of the things they've traditionally done out with the world of COVID-19. So I think there will be a natural sort of spike and boost again once we come out of COVID-19, as we saw in the previous two sessions of lockdown. And I would like to think that's a stimulus for a strong 2021 later in the year. So yeah, I would like to certainly look at the market to be positive later on in the year.
And Tim, what's your view of the market, and also what do you think dealers need to put in place to make a success of 2021?
I broadly agree with Cameron's view. We were all positively delighted by the bounce back that we experienced in July. I'm not sure we'll get quite the same level of bounce this time when we come back out of the current lockdown. I think there are other factors potentially that could impact, such as vehicle supply that Cameron's already talked about. I think there's still some concerns over what the impact of Brexit will really mean for us going forward. So I think there'll be a bit of reluctance there. But I think as a nation, we get bored with being in recession. We get bored of doing nothing, and ultimately we will spend our way out of it. So I would expect this to be a pretty strong year going forward. I think I guess the one unknown really is what the impact of the changes in 2030 will bring to the market. Are they going to start impacting us yet, or will they be a little bit further down the line? I think in terms of what dealers, sorry Tim, I think your question was around what dealers need to do this year or to be successful. I actually think the dealers who've weathered the storm over the last few months have come out of it leaner and fitter. We've all been pleasantly surprised yet again by the sector's ability to weather such a difficult set of circumstances. And I think those dealers have come out of it more efficient than they were before. They've developed new ways of working. Those ways of working will become the norm. And I think a lot of them have been pleasantly surprised how much they can do with less resource going forward. So I expect in the CDK world, this is great, but I expect the use of technology to only continue and accelerate going forward.
Okay. And there's opportunities there, aren't there, Cameron? You mentioned before we went live on the interview, you mentioned actually that there's quite some success in terms of profitability of using technology to sell cars, e-commerce and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when customers are self-serving and they're actually picking that journey themselves, the online journey in car sales doesn't lend itself to significant levels of discounting. It also, if you've got a fully tailorable deal structure, then you've got customers that will pick the finance options, they'll pick the value-add products and actually self-serve in that. And so from our experience, we are seeing up to £300 additional margin from going through that on loop versus the traditional dealership journey, which probably surprised us to start with. I think as people are getting more comfortable with it, we're seeing why it's happening.
Okay, fantastic. Tim, I believe you had a question that you wanted to put to Cameron earlier. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we've seen the adoption and increase in importance of the digital journey over the last 12 months, and I think like many people, it was always going to come. It's just accelerated hugely in the last 12 months. Where do you see that leaving the traditional bricks and mortar approach of the automotive market going forward, Cameron? Do you think that's going to become, do you think that model will change markedly in the next sort of 5 to 10 years? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, Tim. I think one of the pieces that we're seeing with the digital ecosystem is that you can have a much bigger digital footprint that you can sometimes have as a result of the traditional bricks and mortar. I think there's also going to be a convergence between how the digital footprint plays out and the adoption of electric vehicles. We've got a kind of 10-year cycle ahead of us, and I think there's going to be a really interesting convergence there. And will there be absolutely the necessity for the same footprint of bricks and mortar going forward? So I think it's something that will play out, but I think you'd have to see if the consumer adopts more of this digital landscape, then there won't be quite the same necessity for bricks and mortar. That said, people still like to go and touch and feel and see cars. There's still a need and a desire to do that, but I think more of that journey, and the purchasing journey in particular, will be done online.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. I think we're nearly out of time, but just quickly, one more question that I'd like to pose you both. Where do you think the average dealer will be in 5 years' time in terms of the technology they'll be using?
Tim, do you want to
Tim
take that one
first.
first? Great question. I think the current journey that we're on will only continue. I don't think it will ever replace people in the business. I think what it will do is enable them to be more effective, more efficient, and I think it will be focused. Cameron touched on making it more usable and customer friendly a little bit earlier. I think it will fit better into the day job, if you like, and enable the dealers to deliver a better customer experience, because I think that will generally be one of the key points, especially if we move to an agency model, etc., going forward. That customer experience will be ever more important than it ever has been.
And Cameron, your perspective?
Yeah, I think the next 5 years will be very interesting. I guess from some of the research that I've done, I think, you know, Amazon has driven people to an online commerce journey. I think in the next 5 years, you'd like to think that there'll be a point where we might tip the balance and 50% of customers will actually buy their car online, but it will take them to have had a good first experience for them to repeat that buying experience again. So I think it's, you know, the ball's in the court of those providers and software suppliers out there who can deliver that seamless end-to-end customer journey for it fully to be adopted at this stage.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim and Cameron. I'm afraid we're about out of time, so I'd like to thank you also to the audience for submitting your questions. If there's anything else you wish to ask, you can by all means pop onto the CDK stand and continue the conversations there further. But yeah, thank you for watching.